So Mitch McConnell sat down for an interview with 60 Minutes, and I watched the entire thing, and I highly recommend that you do too, because this was one of the more interesting interviews that I've seen in a while. He talked at length about his relationship with Donald Trump, and he also talked about how he still feels about January 6th to this day. He got emotional during the interview and choked up and teared up during it. It's one of the more fascinating Mitch McConnell interviews that I've ever watched. And folks, I honestly can say I've damn near watched them all because Mitch McConnell was elected to the Senate when I was 4 years old, and I grew up over in Kentucky. And like I've said many times here on the channel, me and my family have always talked politics like some people talk sports. I mean, it's something we've always followed very closely and been very in tune with. And so growing up in Kentucky, we were very aware of Mitch McConnell. And my family always strongly opposed him. But we always recognized that Mitch McConnell is one of the slickest, most conniving politicians ever. You can love the guy, you can hate the guy, feel about him however you want to feel about him. But the dude has always knew how to play the game to his advantage. He's always knew how to play the ropes to his advantage. And he's always managed to sell himself out every time. Just when you think that Mitch McConnell might show a little bit of integrity, man, he will turn on a dime and just sell himself out. And he'll say he's doing it for the party, for the good of the party. But we've watched him my entire life go back and forth. But when Donald Trump came along, those two had a completely different relationship than he's had with presidents in the past. And we saw Donald Trump basically push Mitch McConnell out of the Republican Party. It's one of the craziest things that I've ever seen. When I hear people in my part of the world refer to Mitch McConnell as a rhino, they say he's a Republican in name only. I know immediately that person just started following politics when Trump came along. I know that they actually know nothing about politics and how the game is played and how it works, because Mitch McConnell is like the final boss of the Republican Party. If he was on the video Mario of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell's the final dragon. Okay, that's who he is. He is as Republican as it gets. You can't get any more higher of a Republican than that guy. So whenever someone calls him a rhino, I always laugh out loud at that. I'm like, no, that guy is the epitome of the Republican Party, has been his entire career, and sold himself out for that more times than we can all count. His relationship with Trump has been a rocky one, and we've seen Trump push him out to the point that he's being booed at the Republican National Convention, but he will still, at the end of the day, he will still come back around and he will still bow the knee to Trump. And he's 82 years old. We've seen him slip it. We've seen him have his freezing moments. You would think this guy would maybe want to end on a different note, but he doesn't. Now, I'm not going to be able to play you any of the clips from 60 Minutes because they always claim copyrights and we're not allowed to share them here on YouTube. So I'm going to read to you some from the transcript and we're going to talk about this. And again, I would highly recommend that you watch it. But let me bring up this particular part. This is right at the start of the interview. He's asked, you have said that you feel liberated like Martin Luther King, free at last. So free from what? Free to do what? And McConnell says, well, I will be more outspoken about things than I particularly care about than I have in the past. Says particularly the resurgence of isolationism in today's Republican Party. America first, that's what they used to say in the 30s. And I'm hopeful the new administration will understand and act not with just the language that says America first, but finding that underscores the nature of the threat. Look, what is the situation? North Korea, China, Russia, Iran. This is a huge threat, a fight between autocrats and democracies. And when it comes to the democratic world, only one country can lead, and that's us. So then the speaker asked him, says, that's Diane Sawyer, says, that's the fundamental difference between what you're saying and what this administration seems to be saying, which is, we don't want to be the leader of the free world anymore. And McConnell says, well, I can only speak for myself, but I think it's dangerous to step aside and assume that by speaking to autocrats, they will somehow treat you better. And then Diane asks him, what about tariffs on our allies? And he says, it will drive up the cost of everything. In other words, it'll be paid for by the American consumers. I mean, why in the world would you want to get into a fight with our allies over this? Now, right there, folks, if I had just tuned in to politics for the first time ever and I heard Mitch McConnell saying that, I would be like, seems like me and this guy is on the same team here. He seems to be saying the same thing that I'm saying. but you'll learn very quickly he's not. I'm going to go back here and play you an old clip because I want to lead into what he has to say now about January 6th. But I want to replay this old clip. You may have seen it before, but it's worth watching again in context. Watch this clip of what Mitch McConnell had to say about January 6th back then. Look who he blames and take a look very closely.
January 6th was a disgrace. American citizens attacked their own government. They used terrorism to try to stop a specific piece of domestic business they did not like. Fellow Americans beat and bloodied our own police. They stormed the Senate floor. They tried to hunt down the Speaker of the House. They built a gallows and chanted about murdering the Vice President. They did this because they'd been fed wild falsehoods by the most powerful man on earth. Because he was angry he'd lost an election. Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. The House accused the former president of, quote, incitement. That is a specific term from the criminal law. Let me just put that aside for a moment and reiterate something I said weeks ago. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
So that's what he said back then. But then when he had the chance to vote to impeach Trump, he didn't. So there's again where he will say one thing that we all agree with, and we say to ourselves, oh, I remember how I felt when I heard him say that. I thought, yes, okay, now more Republicans needs to say this. But then he turns around and votes against impeaching Trump, and that's why we're in the whole mess we're in today. But when he's asked on 60 Minutes about how he feels about it today, it's very interesting what he has to say now. Let's take a look back at the transcript here. So he's asked, how would you describe your relationship with President Trump? And he says, well, we haven't spoke for quite a while. I was very upset about what happened on January 6th. And then he's asked, you had to be evacuated from the Senate along with other leaders. Your staff was in your office. The rioters were banging on your door. Someone with a flagpole broke a window in your office. And McConnell said, well, my staff in the Capitol was putting furniture up against the doors. Think about that, folks. Think about what we're talking about for all the ones that tries to gaslight us and say it was a day of peace and love. And she says to prevent them from coming. And he says to prevent the rioters from breaking the doors and getting at them. And what was it about? To try to prevent the orderly transfer of government, which had never happened before in our country. Then he's asked, your staff, after the crisis was over, you went and spoke to them. It was a highly emotional situation. Do you remember? Now, I'm pretty sure this is the part of the interview where he choked up. But he says, oh, I remember it well. And she says, do you remember what you told him? And he says, yeah, I remember what I told him. And then he goes on that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of that day. And that's the way I still feel about it. Now she says, what are your views on President Trump and his supporters trying to change what happened on January 6th? They're calling it a day of love. They call the rioters martyrs. And McConnell says, no, it was an insurrection. Plain as day. No, it was an insurrection. Then she asked, what about the pardons for the people who stormed the Capitol that day? He said, I think that pardoning the people who have been convicted is a mistake. Here it is. But while he has been critical of the president, he has almost always wound up retracting this clause. Take the impeachment battle. The question is on the article of impeachment. McConnell ended up voting against convicting Mr. Trump at the Senate trial that took place after he had just left office. A conviction could have disqualified the ex-president from running. So again, it's all on Mitch McConnell's hands. He can sit here now, he can get emotional, he can look back and cry about it, and he can say to this day, yes, it still was an insurrection, but he will always turn around and bow the knee to Trump, and he'll say he's doing it for the party. And that's what's so frustrating about politics, It's what's so frustrating is how that people just can't own up to mistakes and people can't stand their ground. I remember back then thinking when I first heard him say that Trump was practically morally responsible. When he called it an insurrection, I thought, okay, Republicans, all of you get together and say that. All of you get together and say that. And let's try to remove this terrible stain from American history. It's always going to be there, but can we at least come together and recognize it for what it was? And then over the last 4 years, we have been gaslit every single step of the way. They have gaslit us on this one. And they have told us we didn't really see what we think we saw. And they've played clips of things happening across the street. And then you have someone like McConnell, a lifelong Republican, like I said, the final boss of the Republican Party, the epitome of the party. And he's sitting there crying emotional about it because he knew it was wrong. He knew it was wrong. But then he still didn't vote. He couldn't convict him, couldn't bring himself to do that. And now here we are. Mitch McConnell played the game for himself. And I think his legacy will be blocking Obama's Supreme Court pick and not convicting Trump. After all those years of service, I think those are the things he's going to be remembered for. And he's a guy who you sometimes look to and go, okay, what are you going to say, Mitch? And just when you think he might have a backbone, just when you think he might go say something, he always bows that knee to the Republican Party. And to do it for Trump, it's like I would have more respect for the guy if he would have just stuck to his guns on that one and never backed down, and continued to call it out and said, no, I will not support this man for president. But when he turns around and says, well, I'll support whoever the nominee is, it's like, really? I mean, is that what we are? That's not what I am. I know it's not what you are. We're not those kind of people. I've said this so many times. Donald Trump, people, when someone says to me, well, Donald Trump used to support Democrats, used to vote Democratic. He could have never got this act over in the Democratic Party, and he could have never got this act over with progressives and liberals because we hold people to account and because we can't be herded up like sheep. I mean, one of our biggest strengths is that we have diversity, and sometimes that works against us because our differing opinions sometimes works against us. I've always joked and said sometimes it's kind of like we're trying to herd cats. It's harder to do. It's something that works for us and against us, but at least we have principles we stand on where we say, no, I'm not getting behind that person. And trust me, Trump wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes in the Democratic Party for all those that says, oh, he used to be a Democrat or vote Democrat. No, he wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes in our party because we would have held him to account. He made it in the Republican Party because of people like Mitch McConnell, who was willing to sell out their party for Donald Trump. So Mitch McConnell gets no brownie points from Brando. Sorry. I spent a lifetime talking about Mitch McConnell in political discussions, and I've always said this, and I'll close with this. I've traveled my part of the world as a musician for years. I've had political conversations on bar stools having beers. I've never met one Kentuckian that says, boy, that Mitch McConnell's a good one. I love that guy. Never heard that. I've never seen Mitch McConnell signs other than like maybe one big sign near a courthouse or something, but I've not seen Mitch McConnell flags flying off people's trucks. I've not seen bumper stickers, really. They all know what a crook and a con man he is, but they've also been brought up to believe that Democrats are worse. And so you always hear, well, I know he's a crook, at least he ain't a Democrat. And now they hate him because Trump says to. And if Trump ever tells them to cheer him again, they'll cheer for him. That's why they get no brownie points for booing McConnell. We've always been booing McConnell because we've always seen through him. Go watch that whole interview for yourself if you feel like it. It was an interesting piece. To see a man sit there and choke up and get that emotional over something, but still sell out, that's one of the dirtiest things about politics.